All right, well, welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us today for addressing driving concerns and dementia with Jeannine Forrest. I'm so excited to hear her talk about this really interesting topic and learn a little bit about her expertise. A couple of housekeeping rules for today's webinar. Right now you are all on mute and your video is off. I ask that you keep yourself on mute and with your video off for the duration of the program. If you have questions, please feel free to chat them and I will jump in to narrate your questions essentially. And at the end, we will open it up for more questions. So you are welcome to take yourself off of mute or show your video at that time so we can have an interactive discussion. And I'll let you know when that time comes. And then, again, ask questions throughout this presentation via the chat. I will send the recording to you all in the event you miss something or want to hear something again. And that's about it. So just quickly, I'm Lauren with Belmont Village, Lincoln Park. We're an assisted living and memory care community in the heart of Lincoln Park. We are open a year today, next Monday. So we are coming up on our 1-year anniversary. We're so excited to celebrate with our residents and their families in a very COVID friendly way. We'll have a little bit of a party here with some bands or a band and some social distancing and visitations for our families with to-go boxes. It's going to be really fun. But we are about a third of the way full and we are known for our 3 different levels of care: true assisted living, on the opposite end of the spectrum, our secured memory setting, but kind of in between is our Circle of Friends program. And it's for folks with mild cognitive impairment who maybe won't thrive in an assisted living type of environment, but in a secured setting are too high functioning for that. And so it provides structure and routine for our residents that have mild cognitive impairment to moderate dementia. And also, runs a program that was developed by a gerontologist and social worker, Beverly Sanborn, to help build cognitive reserves, because we know that, you can't reverse dementia or any kind of memory loss, but we can try and stay as high functioning as possible. And so if you're interested in learning more about our Circle of Friends program, I am happy to help. Myself and my counterpart, Mike, are, happy to answer any questions. But with no further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Forrest. So Jeannine, she is a dementia educator, a speaker, a private care consultant, a PhD, an RN. She does it all. Her company, Through the Forest, offers guidance and education to family caregivers and organizations impacted by Alzheimer's and other dementias through a variety of programming, including dementia coach on-call phone services. She's focused her clinical practice, education, and research in the care of older adults with dementia, pain, palliative, and end-of-life care. She's done everything. She's served as a faculty member at the University of Illinois of Chicago. She also served as a faculty member over at Rush University, and she's truly a geriatric and dementia expert. So really excited to hand it over to you, Jeannine, to really educate us on this amazing topic. So I'll let you take it from here.
Wonderful. And can you hear me okay? I want to make sure I'm coming across. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Lauren, and thank you to Belmont Village for hosting this program, and welcome to all of you who are taking your precious time out of the day to spend it with me. And hopefully you'll come away with a few concrete sort of strategies going forward. I also want to let you know, I'm aware that many of you come with different backgrounds, understanding about dementia. So my role today is to not only have you learn a little bit more about driving concerns, but what really fuels those concerns as the brain is changing with the varieties and the different subtypes of dementias. So I want you to think about when you first started to drive, maybe at the age of 15, 16, some of you maybe even younger. But imagine just, what does driving mean to you? For some, it just means independence. freedom, being able to be self-reliant, a sense of adventure, not only from going from one, point A to point B in terms of transportation, but the idea of driving elicits a myriad of memories and understanding and sense of self-worth and self-esteem and all of those things. So when we're talking about perhaps renegotiating the ability and having concerns about someone else's driving, that may be a loved one, a family member, your spouse, or you may be on the call because you may be concerned about your ability to drive. It's more than just the driving. There's a lot of background and emotional, I don't want to use the word baggage, but there's a lot of emotions connected to driving that makes this topic more complex. But when it comes down to it, we have to really think about safety as a priority, not only for the driver, but for other people on the road. And so how do we balance the concerns and the want for freedom and independence as the brain is changing? So just a little bit of background that I think is important to understand that we really are talking about the brain. And the brain is our supercomputer. It controls everything, all cognitive functions, and also what we call our motor functions, our ability to move, all of our muscles, the ability to control our reflexes, the ability to hold our ball and bladder, right? Everything. So driving, believe it or not, involves every aspect of the brain. Now, I'm not going to test you, but this slide giving sort of the anatomy of the brain and the different areas that control specific movements or cognitive functions. So for example, the frontal lobe right behind your forehead is significant in terms of being able to sort of modify and regulate our judgment, the ability to sequence what to do next, voluntary movement. When we look at the cerebellum towards the back, that controls balance and the ability to know how to turn and move our left hand over our right hand, right? We're looking at all movement. Just think about when you're driving, what it takes to back into a space or move out of a space or turn your head to see if there are people behind you as you're changing lanes. So the bottom line here is that driving safely really requires the brain to be functioning at a very high level. And so just to share a little bit more, the hippocampus, some of you may have heard of this word. It's about the size of a walnut. And that is our recording button. And hopefully all of your hippocampi are working well and you're able to take in information and store it into working memory and share with others. And so this is important if you're learning a new route or route, depending on how you say that, and not become lost in familiar locations. I had alluded to a few other sections, but the cerebellum in terms of turning. The ability to stay alert and awake in long drives, that's our pons. Emotional control. When someone cuts you off, right? Are you the first one to kind of gun it or give a certain hand gesture? Is your amygdala regulating your emotional control or not? And when it's not, people become much more aggravated and irritable when they're driving. We talked about the frontal lobe. The significance is one needs to be able to process competing stimuli. And that is significant if you're out on a busy street, on an expressway. What if we add inclement weather into that? One area I'm going to focus on right now is what we call sort of the parietal occipital temporal lobe. That it controls what we call visual spatial processing. So I have a picture of someone trying to back in to a parking space. So visual spatial processing means your ability to understand really what you're seeing and interpret between size and location. And so if it's well regulated, you're able to squeeze that car in sort of like threading a needle at times. Or are you bumping into the curb or smashing into the bumpers of other people? And so driving really does take a lot of spatial processing. What I want to show you next are brains, sort of mid-sagittal sections. If you look behind the cranium on the left, that's a control. That's a normal brain. Look at the density of the tissue and how well that's packed into the skull. As we move to the right, we have someone with what we call dementia of Lewy body type. The tissue actually shrinks, and as the shrinkage occurs, so does the capacity for what we call neuronal processing, and this disturbs the ability for these nerve cells to communicate. Hence the change in the ability of the brain to process information, hence the changes that occur while trying to drive. On the right, we have someone with moderate to advanced Alzheimer's disease, and you see more significant shrinkage. I'm going to show you with my cursor the area where the hippocampus should be. Here it is on the left. You can see how dense and full it is. On the right, you can see it's quite diminished. And so that explains why someone really cannot remember from one moment to the next, because the tissue that controls that no longer exists. Here's someone with frontal temporal dementia. You see the frontal lobe significantly impacted. So the reason I'm showing you these things is because we don't necessarily have X-ray vision, and people look fine on the outside. But this is really what's happening on the inside that explains these changes and the diminished capacity over time to be able to drive. Unfortunately, with many of the dementias, it's progressive in nature. Many are fatal. And so we will have a continued decline in visual spatial ability and memory in a host of dementias, and problem-solving ability. Hence, what we really need to be able to do this safely. So that's kind of explaining what's happening. In some dementias, particularly Lewy body, you may have a preponderance of hallucinations. And I had a client once who stopped her car almost on a dime in the middle of an expressway because she was certain that it was a massive tiger in the middle of the road. These hallucinations can be extremely vivid, very real, and can play havoc on one's ability to problem solve and drive safely. Okay, so I hope I give you enough of a background to explain why we need to be concerned about driving for people with different dementias. That said, it is not an automatic, meaning since someone is automatically diagnosed with a dementia, wow, we have to stop immediately. That's not the case. These are progressive diminishments in different areas of the brain. So depending upon when someone is diagnosed, it can certainly be early on. And if you are the loved one, the passenger, I want to give you some ideas of what to look out for and when to start being concerned. So I want you to look for problems with multitasking, not necessarily even when driving, but being able to maybe do 2 things, 3 things at once when not in the car. Now, I happen to think multitasking is overrated for any of us because we really cannot pay attention. But we should be able to maybe talk and walk and perhaps be able to dress and talk. Becoming lost in familiar places. This is another alert sign. Finding difficulty identifying space and distances. This could happen even navigating curbs or steps. Depth perception becomes impacted, and if one cannot identify depth or spaces, and so people are bumping into things or perhaps more prone to falling, this is a concern, or problems with coordination. I'm going to encourage you to keep a log of what you're observing and when you're seeing them. This will be important documentation. Other areas to look out for is if one is driving, if someone is mixing up the brake and gas pedals. I've seen, unfortunately, people drive through storefronts, things like that, mixing up gas and brake pedals. Here's one: stopping for no apparent reason from your point of view, but it's that depth perception, thinking that the car in front of them is nearer than it really is, or is there a hallucination, thinking there's an animal on the road, driving too slowly. People have a general insight in the beginning of some dementias, not all, that they're having some limitations and challenges, and they're overly cautious. Look for fluctuating alertness or fluctuating drowsiness. So if someone's sleeping, falls asleep while at a stoplight, that's a concern. And this may be a characteristic of some of us, regardless of a dementia, becoming more easily nervous or aggravated during or with other drivers around us. But you're going to see an exaggerated response. Look for changes or difficulty changing lanes or exiting, not knowing when to exit ramps, or having sort of near collisions. Does someone, a loved one, come back with unexplained scrapes, bumps, bruises to the car, fender benders, really cannot explain it, or it's always someone else's fault? And again, I remind us here to keep a written log of these concerns. So imagine here, I have a window of someone looking out a car window, and it's rainy and foggy. Imagine if it's snowy. So that is another stimuli that one would have to compete with in terms of processing and navigating information within the brain. I alluded to this, that some people do have insight and self-awareness and begin to sort of limit their own driving. They may just drive during the day, during sort of downtimes, not during the height of rush hour. Or people may drive just down familiar roads that they've done, a majority of their life. This would not be a time to go on a road trip cross country. So they're avoiding heavy traffic and making sure that they're avoiding inclement weather or night driving. So this gives the sense that if someone in the early stages of dementia can still drive, but with some of these parameters to keep everyone safe. There are driving rehab specialists that you can make an appointment individually. This often happens in a hospital setting. They're occupational therapists with a certain specialty in driving evaluation. They're also used for people post-stroke, brain injury. But you can secure a driving kind of evaluation if you're concerned. Not only that, the Department of Motor Vehicles, they vary by state, but you can also secure an evaluation, an individual evaluation from your various states as well. It may take longer, especially now during this pandemic. There may be more of a wait line time, but that is another alternative if there's concern. And they will document baseline and have you come back perhaps every 6 months to see if there are changes over time. So this takes a little bit of the onus. If it's a family member who's concerned, you can have that someone who's objective and doesn't have that emotional connection do the evaluation. Since we're in Illinois, I wanted to give individuals on this call the website. It's called cyberdriveillinois.com. And it's located in the Dirksen building in Springfield. You can write or call and ask for additional information on how you can set up an evaluation. The other part you should know is it is an Illinois law, and I copied that is completed by your physician or nurse practitioner or physician assistant if you have any medical or mental condition that can result in a loss of ability to drive safely. This is also required for people who have seizures, maybe on epileptic kind of medications. So it is a law. If there's someone who has been diagnosed with some form of dementia, to begin this medical report form. If you're the concerned party, the family member, or you're concerned about a relative or a client or a patient, the Illinois Secretary of State's office has an order of sort of protection for all persons. And you can have the nurse practitioner or doctor or police officer request an investigation. So there are alternative ways of getting this investigated so that the onus just doesn't come from the person themselves, who often lack insight into the fact that they're having difficulty driving. And so, yes, that's an important piece that I will underscore in a slide or two, is that it may be that you're on the call that the person you're concerned about lacks the insight, and that's often the most frustrating piece. It's amazing when the brain is working well, when it's all working well together, our ability to have self-awareness and self-judgment and self-safety sort of awareness. When our brain is intact, that's working well. And when it's not, that's a problem, because you think you're doing just fine, thank you, I don't need any help, I've been driving for 60 years, don't tell me what to do, right? Some of you, I can only imagine, are nodding your heads. So a couple alternatives to think about first. Certainly family and friends can offer to drive, hopefully, if there are people available. With Uber, Lyft, or taxi, that can be an alternative. Certainly wearing our masks and our hand sanitizer. PACE is public sort of transportation. If you're not as concerned that the person would become lost when they move out of their familiar space, PACE may be an alternative. other ways of accessing deliveries, groceries or home deliveries. We certainly are much better with online shopping. Some stylists visit in the home if you're concerned about getting hair done, if that's a routine thing to do. The area agency on aging has resources in order to bring supplies and things like that to the home. And even libraries can deliver. So if someone was relying on transportation and driving to do those things, quite often we can bring it to the home. So this is where we talk about the lack of insight and resistance to change. I've had physicians write do not drive orders, and it's in writing. And so when the person says, I want to drive, you can bring that out and say, I'm sorry, it's not me, it's your physician, it's your lawyer, are saying right now that it's not safe to do. You can also bring in care managers to do the same. So sometimes what happens is it gets incredibly scary, unsafe, and no real insight or recognition that it's time to stop driving. And family members do have a hard time. This is an emotional time to say, Mom, it's just not safe. And even when you say that, the person doesn't believe you. They think you're just giving them a hard time. You're trying to control them. And so the safe and responsible thing to do there's a couple things. You can hide the keys, disable the car so that it really doesn't work. And you could say, oh, I'm sorry, we have to get it fixed, and it's still not fixed, or move the car. That may seem drastic, but when you think of the alternative of someone perhaps hurting themselves or hurting other people, pedestrians, you've got to balance the benefits versus the burdens. And there are alternatives. What I didn't list here, I had a client who, the spouse took away the keys and could not drive, but he had young onset dementia. And so we didn't think about this up front, but he was an avid cyclist, and he took out his bicycle and went for miles and miles and miles. And we found him a few hours later, hence the need for making sure we have some safe return mechanism put into place. So this is not only driving, but I would also include driving a bicycle if that's something that someone has done all their life and they enjoy doing it. In someone's state of thinking with their dementia, it would make absolute sense to be able to ride your bike. But there may be concerns about getting lost. I want to say here that for the family members, the caregivers, this is not an easy issue. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this call, correct? And so this is something that requires perhaps additional support, sort of mentoring, coaching, talking to each other, knowing that that you're not the bad one, you're not the heavy, but you're trying to balance safety in the most loving way, and it won't come off as being loving to the person who really lacks the insight, but in fact you are. Before we turn it over to questions, I am going to say that if any of you would require or enjoy a one-to-one consultation, you can always talk to me after this talk together. Like I said, my company is called Through the Forest, but I offer a service called Dementia Coach on Call. And this is one-to-one phone or Zoom conversations, and I help to navigate a variety of issues related to dementia care. So now I am going to open it up to questions, and I'll let Lauren navigate the chat button.
All right, so please, feel free to either unmute yourself, come on your video and ask questions, or type in the chat feature. But I think that, this is such an interesting topic because it is taking away someone's independence. And, I think that the average conversation, no one responds, yeah, that's fine. You can take away my, my keys and my license, right? And so, do you have a good idea of what the, I can assume at least that the average response is, no, I can do it on my own. And, what for a caregiver or a spouse or a loved one that is trying to kind of overcome that I can do it myself, the therapeutic fib where the car doesn't work, definitely a great route. But what other answers would you maybe recommend, Jeannine, or responses to I can do it myself, where you're being truthful without maybe bursting their bubble? Do you have any kind of words of wisdom of a good response to that? I think that that's a really hard question, but what are your thoughts?
No, that's a valid and very, very common question. And so you can take this hit and say, whoever that, Dad, I'm really concerned. I love you. And we're going to think of other ways to get you around. Now, that said, most people in general, the whole idea is that you want to say that you're the one concerned. And the idea here is that their lack of insight may not always grasp it, but it's okay to be sort of the fall guy if you're not willing to have outside assistance through, the physicians, the nurse practitioners, the lawyers. You want to give alternatives. I'll be able to bring you, I'll be available Monday and Wednesday to help you out. So you want to be able to give, the alternatives. Mm-hmm. Make sure that there's a backup plan with alternatives. If you just say no, that really puts a damper on everything. Then the person may feel trapped. The other part is avoid explaining. You can get into this cycle back and forth of rationalizing, and that's why you want to give just, I'm sorry, this is really hard, and I'm really sorry you feel this way, but I'm really concerned. I wouldn't go much more into that because just what I said, that lack of insight and being able to reason, you'll be arguing back and forth indefinitely ad nauseum, and you're both going to get frustrated. So the idea is to keep a loving tone, keep your voice calm even if they escalate. Make this as compassionate and loving and understanding, almost like a recording button on your end. And anticipate pushback, because that, in their dementia, it makes absolutely no sense for you to want to take away their keys. And it never will. And so if you think at some point you're going to get a breakthrough and they're going to say, by golly, yes, you're absolutely right, I don't need any help, that's probably not going to happen until we move into the much later stages of dementia when there's less certainly connection and awareness and ability. But for the duration, you need to be able to come up with sort of a pat answer that you can give over and again in a loving tone.
Well, and it's so interesting because, as my professional job, of course, I put on educational events and do some outreach to, other medical field professionals so that our families have resources. But oftentimes when I'm talking to families about making this decision also, maybe moving into a facility like this, it's the same, level of, well, they're not going to buy in because they don't have the rational understanding of the circumstances to be able to buy in, right? And so, you know, oftentimes when I'm talking with families, I always like to recommend, you know, they're never going to say, yes, I want to move into a community where they can help me with my memory. It
Right.
just isn't going to happen. It doesn't matter if you have memory loss or not. But, you know, giving them choice within that parameter of this is what we're doing, but here's 2 ways we can do it. Which would you prefer? So they still have control, they still have independence, but giving them a decision that they can make that is within the safety parameters needed for that loved one. So that really resonates with me, just, you know, kind of applying that across the board.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I'm, you know, I'm coming on Monday or Wednesday. What works well for you, or would you
Or even
like?
choosing between, you know, which apartment would you like, this one or that, showing them the 2
Right,
different views, or those types of decisions that are still important and give them options, but again, within a safe boundary to make that choice.
yeah, I would also add 2 choices, not more than 2, because then that becomes
Too
too much.
overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, I think that just in general, using your expertise in dementia kind of beyond the driving realm of things, you know, what recommendations or advice can you give to a family member who is maybe just dabbling their toes into, okay, my loved one has memory loss and I'm used to them making decisions, I'm used to them being independent. You know, what advice would you give to someone that's in those early phases that needs to support and maybe make some decisions for their loved one?
Sure, great question. So we you want to come from a heart of compassion. So it's not only what you say, but how you say it. It has to be, you have to convey from tone of voice to words to body language that this is what you're doing is out of love, not out of frustration. And so we want to tap into what remains. We don't want to always think about what a person can no longer do. So we call this ability-based care. So someone may not be able to, go grocery shopping on their own anymore, or take their medications on their own anymore. Okay, fine, but what can they do? So let's prepare a meal together. Now they're not going to certainly start their, the recipe from the beginning to the end without difficulty. Have them mix the salad, set the table. So you are sort of building what I call a cognitive ramp. So you're always, sort of looking at what remains and praising them, giving lots of, accolades for what does exist, and you'll get much better cooperation. It helps all of us to have our self-esteem stroke, right? And
Yeah.
people in the early stages of dementia are often saying what they can no longer do, and that's why depression is often, hand in part of this equation at times. So what's important for family members to do in the earlier stages is to really hone in and, in a loving and not Pollyannish. Don't be, making things up that don't exist. You want to be really true on what people can still do, because they'll see through that.
Reinforcing the abilities they have.
Exactly. So that,
And
that's sort of a broad recommendation.
yeah, and so, kind of thinking of, that's kind of a great recommendation, especially in those early stages where they're aware still that they're maybe having some deficits. But as we kind of progress into that moderate to late stages dementia, where, they don't know that they maybe don't have the same capabilities as they used to. Any recommendations there of, making that transition from, okay, I have given them the opportunity to set the table and now they're, a little too far after that. What's your recommendation there?
So you're really in the moment. You're cueing people, because it's quite often words. lose their power in understanding. So you're working much more in sort of a sensory realm with people, or showing them by example on how to do things. So instead of saying, you know, go brush your teeth, that sequencing, even, you know, that being able to recognize where the toothbrush, toothpaste is for, you may have to put that in their hand and brush your teeth with them. So you're still trying to maintain as much independence as possible. Don't take over everything. You don't need to. That'll only add to your caregiver burden. And so once you get people sort of, you know, doing things repetitiously, quite often they can carry through. So, you know, my words of wisdom is cueing, certainly looking at how you're communicating, and then just being in the moment. It can't have people think about what you're going to do 5 minutes from now. It's what you're doing immediately.
That's really good information and recommendations overall. And I haven't gotten any more questions. So last call for any questions.
Or, you know, a thought maybe, if anyone has learned one new thing today too, if there's any one thing that stood out, would be interesting to me. If there's any one new thing, if not, then we can close. Oh, there looks, do we have one more? I'm just looking at the,
Sure.
I didn't know if someone sent a chat. Okay. For questions
I
or
have it.
comments?
Well, you know, I think that as everyone can tell, Jeannine has an abundance of knowledge on the phases and the details and intricacies of dementia and the care needed. So, of course, if you have a loved one that you are living with or supporting in some way, shape, or form, and you need a little bit of assistance of how to go down that path, how to go through the forest, you can of course call me. And you know, over here at Belmont, would love to talk to you about the specifics of your loved one and the benefits of living in a community, and when to really make that decision, because it can be challenging, and that's why we're here, is to help. So I'll send a follow-up email to everyone from today's event. Dr. Forrest will do another event actually for us at the end of September. I believe it's the 25th, and it's coping with caregiving emotions, and it's going to be really outstanding as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that invitation with the date and time. I'll send it in the email as well so that you can RSVP to join us then. But I will thank everyone and say goodbye.
Well, thank you again for this opportunity, and wish everyone well. And I'm here as a resource if you need me.
Thank you. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take good care.